I never told my son what was actually hidden inside the rusted warehouse his mother left behind. He thought it was just piles of old metal and dust. His wife Tiffany thought it was a waste of prime real estate that she could sell to fund her fake luxury lifestyle. They both thought I was just a grieving, senile old man who had lost his grip on reality. They were wrong. Dead wrong. Last night, as the blue and red lights of 3 police cruisers flashed against the peeling paint of Warehouse 4B, I watched Tiffany scream in handcuffs, realizing she had just used a plasma cutter to destroy the very thing that could have saved them. She didn't just break a lock. She broke a federal law. I stood there, leaning against my truck, feeling the heavy brass key in my pocket, the one she tried so hard to steal. I warned them. But greed has a way of making people deaf. Before I tell you how my own family ended up in the back of a squad car, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments if you have ever had to protect your legacy from the people who were supposed to love you. The sound of dirt hitting a casket is the heaviest sound in the world. Thud, thud, thud. It sounds final. It sounds like a door closing that will never open again. We were standing in the windiest section of the cemetery, a gray Tuesday in Chicago, that felt like the sky itself was weeping. I am Victor Stone, and for 40 years I ran Stone Foundations. I have poured the concrete bases for half the skyscrapers you see in the downtown loop. I know about load-bearing walls. I know about stress fractures. I know that if the foundation is weak, the whole damn building comes down eventually. And as I stood there burying Beatrice, my wife of 45 years, I looked at the 2 people standing next to me and realized my family's foundation wasn't just cracked. It was crumbling. My son Jason stood with his head down looking at his phone every 30 seconds like he was waiting for a life raft. He is 38 years old, but in that moment he looked like a lost child. He has my eyes, but he has none of my grit. I blame myself for that. I worked too many double shifts pouring cement while he was growing up, thinking I was building a future for him. Instead, I built a cushion so soft he never learned how to stand up when life pushed him down. And right now, life was pushing hard. I knew about his debts. I knew about the failed crypto schemes. Beatrice had made me promise not to intervene to let him learn. But looking at him now, I just felt tired. Then there was Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. She was the reason I was grinding my teeth so hard, my jaw ached. While everyone else was dressed in somber black, Tiffany was wearing a navy blue designer dress that was cut too low for a funeral and too high for a church. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even pretending to reflect. She was staring at her shoes, specifically the mud on her red-bottomed heels. "Vic, look at this," she whispered loudly, breaking the sacred silence as the priest recited the final prayer. "This is authentic Italian leather. Who picks a burial plot in a swamp? I cannot believe this." I slowly turned my head to look at her. My eyes were dry. I had done my crying alone in the garage 3 nights ago. Now I was just cold. "It is raining, Tiffany," I said, my voice sounding like gravel in a mixer. "It is a cemetery. It is supposed to be dirt." She rolled her eyes, a gesture she didn't bother to hide. She checked her watch, clearly bored with the business of death. Then she did something that made the blood freeze in my veins. The priest hadn't even finished the amen. The gravediggers hadn't even started filling the hole. And she leaned over, bypassing her husband, and tapped me on the shoulder with a manicured nail. "Listen, Dad. Since we are all here, we need to talk logistics," she said, her voice dropping to that fake sympathetic tone she used on her real estate clients. "Now that B is gone, we need to deal with that eyesore of a warehouse in the industrial district. Unit 4B. I have a developer who is very interested in the land, but we need to clear out all that junk B was hoarding inside." I felt a physical blow to my chest, not from grief, but from the sheer audacity. Beatrice had spent decades collecting and restoring antique printing presses in that warehouse. It was her passion. It was her sanctuary away from the noise of the world. To Tiffany, it was just junk. To Tiffany, everything that didn't have a designer label was junk. I looked at the open grave. I looked at the woman my son had married. "We are burying my wife Tiffany," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "We are not discussing real estate." Jason stepped in, but not to defend me. He stepped in to appease her. "Dad, come on," he said, his voice weak and shaky. "Tiff is just trying to be practical. Mom is gone. You don't need that stress anymore. The maintenance fees on that place are high. We are just trying to help you liquidate." Liquidate. That was the word. They didn't see memories. They saw liquidity. They saw a quick cash injection to cover their bad decisions. I looked at Jason's hands, soft, unmarked. Then I looked at my own, scarred, calloused, thick fingers that could bend rebar but couldn't seem to get through to my own son. "That warehouse is not for sale," I said, turning my back on them to throw a single white rose onto the casket. Tiffany let out a sharp, frustrated sigh. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Vic. Be realistic. You are 70 years old. You are going to be alone in that big house. You can't manage a warehouse full of rusted scrap metal. You are being selfish. Think about Jason. Think about your future grandkids. That land is worth money." She put her hand on my arm. It felt like a snake coiling around a branch. "Just give us the key, Vic. We will hire a crew to clean it out. You won't even have to lift a finger. We will handle everything." I pulled my arm away sharply. The movement was sudden enough that Jason flinched. I reached into the pocket of my wool coat and closed my hand around the heavy ring of keys. The brass felt cold and hard against my palm. The key to Unit 4B was old-fashioned, heavy with intricate teeth. It wasn't just a key to a door. It was the key to Beatrice's soul, and they wanted to melt it down for scrap. I turned to face them fully. The wind whipped around us, blowing dead leaves across the muddy grass. I stood to my full height. 6'2". I might be 70, but I still carry the posture of a man who builds things that last. "Listen to me closely, because I am only going to say this once," I said, staring directly into Tiffany's eyes, watching her fake smile falter. "As long as there is breath in my lungs, you will never step foot inside that warehouse. You think it is junk fine. Then you have no reason to go there." "But Dad," Jason whined, sounding like a teenager. "Enough," I snapped. The sound echoed off the headstones nearby. "This conversation is over. You want to honor your mother, try showing some respect for the things she loved." I walked away. I didn't wait for them. I didn't offer them a ride. I walked towards my truck, leaving them standing in the mud with their expensive shoes and their cheap intentions. But as I walked, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. My gut instinct, honed by 50 years of spotting dangerous structural flaws before they collapsed, was screaming at me. They weren't going to stop. I saw the look in Tiffany's eyes. It wasn't just greed. It was desperation. And desperation makes people dangerous. I unlocked my Ford F-150, climbed in, and looked at the warehouse key one more time before starting the engine. They wanted a war. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I built this city. I could certainly build a trap for a couple of rats. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Jason inviting me to dinner. He said it was just a casual family meal to clear the air, but I knew better. In my line of work, you learn to spot a faulty load-bearing wall from a mile away, and this invitation had cracks all over it. But I agreed to go. You don't inspect a crumbling building by standing on the sidewalk. You have to go inside. I drove my truck into the city, navigating the tight streets of the Loop until I reached their building. It was one of those new glass and steel needles that developers were sticking into the skyline every other month. From the outside, it looked impressive, shimmering in the evening sun. To the average eye, it screamed success. But as I pulled up to the valet stand, ignoring the sneer of the young kid who had to park my muddy Ford F-150 next to a line of pristine Teslas. I saw what it really was: cheap cladding, fast construction. I had bid on the foundation work for this building 5 years ago and walked away because the developers wanted to cut corners on the rebar. It was a fitting place for my son to live, a shiny exterior wrapping a hollow core. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was smooth, but my ears popped. When the doors slid open directly into their penthouse, the smell hit me first. Lavender and expensive cleaning chemicals masking the stale scent of recirculated air. Tiffany was waiting right there, arms wide open, wearing a white silk blouse that probably cost more than my first work van. "Dad," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that felt as genuine as a $3 bill. "I am so glad you came. We felt terrible about the misunderstanding at the cemetery. Please come in. Please come. Let me take your coat." She didn't just take my coat. She practically peeled it off me, her eyes scanning my clothes. I had worn a clean flannel shirt and my good dark jeans, but I could feel her judgment. To her, I was a stain on her beige and cream aesthetic. I walked into the living room, my heavy boots thudding against the floor. I looked down. Engineered hardwood. Not real oak. It was a laminate veneer over plywood. It looked perfect, scratch-free, and utterly soulless, just like the marriage I was walking into. Jason was standing by the wet bar, shaking a cocktail mixer. He looked thinner than I remembered. His smile was tight, not reaching his eyes. "Hey, Dad," he said, pouring a dark liquid into a crystal glass. "I made you an old-fashioned, just the way you like it. Top-shelf bourbon." I took the glass. It was heavy cold. "Thanks, son," I said. I took a sip. It was too sweet. He had used too much syrup trying to mask the bite of the alcohol. That was Jason all over, always trying to sweeten the hard truths. We sat down on a white sectional sofa that looked like it had never been sat on. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking, I had to admit. Chicago sprawled out below us, a grid of amber lights. I pointed to a cluster of dark buildings to the west. "You can see the old industrial park from here," I said, testing the waters. Tiffany stiffened imperceptibly, but her smile didn't waver. She poured herself a large glass of white wine and immediately topped up my drink, even though I had only taken one sip. "Let's not talk about sad things tonight, Vic," she cooed. "Tonight is about family. We just want to make sure you are doing okay. It is a big transition losing B. We worry about you being all alone in that big house with all that stuff." She let the word stuff hang in the air like a dirty rag. I leaned back, feeling the cheap foam of the expensive couch compress under my weight. "I am managing," I said calmly. "The house is quiet, but it is solid. I built it myself, remember." Of course, Dad Jason chimed in, sitting on the edge of the chair, bouncing his leg nervously. "But you know, times are changing. The market is volatile. I have been looking into some new decentralized finance opportunities. The returns are incredible. Way better than real estate or physical assets." Here it comes, I thought. The pitch. I looked at my son. He was wearing a watch that I knew retailed for $20,000. But I also noticed the fraying cuff of his shirt and the way he kept checking his phone screen every time it lit up, as if he was afraid of who was calling. A debt collector, maybe. Or a nervous investor. "You know, I don't believe in money. I can't hold in my hand, Jason," I said, taking a slow sip of the overly sweet drink. "If I can't touch it, it isn't real." Tiffany laughed, a high-pitched, brittle sound. "Oh, Vic, you are so old school. It is charming, really. But the world moves on. Actually, speaking of moving on, have some more bourbon." She reached for the bottle again. She was trying to get me drunk. She thought that if she marinated the old man in alcohol, his brain would soften up. She didn't know that I had outdrunk ironworkers twice my size in the 70s. This watered-down bourbon was nothing. But I played along. I let my eyelids droop a little. I let my speech slur just a fraction of a second. "This is good stuff," I muttered. "Smooth." See, Tiffany beamed, shooting a sharp look at her husband. "Your dad is relaxing. He is reasonable." She stood up to go to the kitchen to check on the catering. She hadn't cooked, of course. I could see the plastic containers from a high-end Italian restaurant on the granite island. When she turned her back, I set my glass down on the coffee table. The table was a slab of marble, cold and hard. I went to reach for a coaster because B had trained me well, and I hated leaving water rings. There was a stack of leather coasters near a pile of Architectural Digest magazines. As I lifted the top coaster, I saw it. It was just a corner of white paper sticking out from under the magazine stack, but the logo caught my eye. It was the logo of Miller & Associates, a commercial land appraisal firm. I knew them. They were sharks. They were the kind of firm you hired when you wanted to bulldoze a neighborhood to build a strip mall. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hand remained steady. I glanced at the kitchen. Tiffany was plating pasta. Jason was staring out the window, lost in his own panic. I moved the magazine just an inch. The document was dated 3 days ago, the day of the funeral. The header read, "Preliminary Valuation, Industrial Plot 4B, Client Meister, and Mrs. Jason Stone." The blood roared in my ears. They hadn't just asked about the warehouse at the funeral. They had already hired appraisers. They had already claimed ownership in their minds. The client name wasn't Victor Stone. It was Jason and Tiffany Stone. They were treating me like I was already dead. I slid the magazine back exactly as it was. I picked up my drink and took a long swallow. The bourbon burned going down, but the anger burned hotter. They weren't just greedy children. They were thieves. They were plotting to sell my wife's legacy before the dirt on her grave had even settled. "Dad, dinner is ready." Jason called out, turning from the window with a fake cheerfulness that made my stomach turn. I stood up. I felt steady, stronger than I had felt in months. The grief was still there, but now it had a companion. Fury, and fury is a powerful fuel. I walked to the dining table. I sat down. I let Tiffany serve me lasagna. I let her pour me a glass of heavy red wine. I listened to them talk about their upcoming trip to the Maldives, a trip I knew they couldn't afford. I smiled. I nodded. I played the part of the clueless, grieving old man, because now I knew the truth. They thought they were playing poker with a senile amateur. They didn't realize they were sitting at the table with the man who built the casino. "That looks delicious, Tiffany," I said, slicing into the pasta. "Thank you, Vic." She smiled, her eyes glittering with calculation. "You know, after dinner, maybe we could just look at some paperwork. Just minor things. Insurance updates. You know, boring stuff." I chewed slowly, savoring the taste of the trap they were setting. "Sure," I said. "We can look." But I left my reading glasses in the truck. "Maybe next time." Disappointment flashed across her face, sharp and ugly, but she masked it quickly. Next time, then. There wouldn't be a next time. As I looked at my son eating his dinner in a house built on debt and lies, I made a silent promise to be. I was going to teach them a lesson about value, and it was going to cost them everything. The following Sunday morning, the silence of my house was broken by the sound of a car door slamming. I was sitting at the kitchen table nursing a mug of black coffee and staring at the empty chair where Beatrice used to sit. The house felt too big these days. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. When the doorbell rang, I knew who it was before I even stood up. Jason and Tiffany. They didn't visit just to say hello. Not anymore. They only visited when they wanted something. I opened the door to find them standing on the porch, beaming like a pair of door-to-door missionaries. Jason was holding a large leather portfolio case, and Tiffany was holding a box of pastries from that expensive bakery across town. "Good morning, Dad." Jason said, his voice brimming with an enthusiasm that felt forced. "We brought donuts. The maple bacon ones you like. I let them in. I am not a rude man. I was raised to offer hospitality even when you know the guests are wearing masks." We sat in the living room. The same living room where I had raised Jason, where he had learned to walk, where he had opened his Christmas presents. Now he sat on the edge of the sofa, clutching that leather portfolio like a shield. So Tiffany started crossing her legs and smoothing down her skirt. "We have been doing a lot of thinking since dinner. We realized that we approached the whole warehouse situation the wrong way. We were insensitive and we are sorry." I watched her over the rim of my coffee mug. Her apology sounded rehearsed, like a script she had practiced in the mirror. "We know how much that place meant to Mom," Jason added, looking at me with big earnest eyes. "And we realized that selling it would be wrong. It would be disrespectful to her memory." I lowered my mug. This was unexpected. I had prepared myself for another argument about real estate values. I hadn't prepared for this. "What are you saying, Jason?" I asked. Jason unzipped the portfolio case and spread a series of glossy architectural renderings on the coffee table. They were beautiful drawings. They showed the interior of the warehouse, but it was transformed. The rusty beams were painted exposed steel. The concrete floors were polished. There were easels everywhere, and children painting, and bright sunlight streaming through the skylights. "We want to create the Beatrice Stone Foundation," Jason said, his voice trembling slightly. "A community art center for underprivileged kids. Mom loved art. She loved fixing things. We want to turn the warehouse into a place where kids can learn to build and create. We want to keep the building Dad. We want to honor her name." I looked at the drawings. I looked at the sign in the rendering, the Beatrice Stone Center for the Arts. I felt a lump form in my throat. It was a beautiful idea. It was exactly the kind of thing Beatrice would have loved. She was always bringing home stray furniture to fix, always teaching the neighborhood kids how to use a hammer. Jason reached out and took my hand. His palm was sweaty. "Dad, I miss her so much," he whispered, and I saw tears welling up in his eyes. Real tears. "I know I have been a screw-up. I know I haven't been the son you wanted. But I want to do this right. Let me do this for her, please." My heart ached. In that moment, I didn't see the man who was drowning in debt. I saw my little boy. I saw the son who used to follow me around job sites wearing a plastic hard hat. I wanted to believe him. God help me, I wanted to believe him so badly. Every father wants to believe his son is a hero waiting to happen. I took a deep breath, letting the guard around my heart lower just a few inches. If this was true, if they really wanted to preserve her legacy, then maybe I had been wrong about them. Maybe the appraisal papers I saw were just them exploring options before they came up with this idea. "It is a wonderful idea, son," I said softly. "Your mother would be touched." Tiffany clapped her hands together a little too loudly. "Oh, Vic, that is wonderful. We knew you would see the vision. So we have the paperwork right here to transfer the management of the property to the nonprofit entity. We can get the cleaning crews in there by Tuesday. We need to gut the whole space to put in the new HVAC system and the art studios. Gut the space." The phrase hung in the air. I looked at the rendering again. In the drawing, the warehouse was empty. Clean, sterile, there were no machines. I looked up at Tiffany. Her eyes were shining not with tears, but with victory. She was already mentally decorating the space, or selling it. "I will agree to this," I said slowly, watching them closely. "On one condition." "Anything, Dad?" Jason said, wiping his eyes. "The warehouse is huge, 3,000 square feet. You don't need all of it for the art classes right away. There are 3 machines in the back. The 1920 Linotype, the Chandler and Price Press, and your mother's restoration workbench. Those stay." The room went quiet. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to get louder. I continued, keeping my voice steady. We can build a glass partition around them, make them part of the exhibit, show the kids the history of printing. It fits perfectly with an art center. I will keep the key to the back room until the partition is built. I watched Tiffany's face. For a split second, the mask slipped. Her eyebrow twitched. Her smile faltered just a fraction of an inch. It wasn't a look of consideration. It was a look of annoyance. She didn't want a museum. She wanted a blank slate. You can't sell a building to a developer if it has 3 tons of cast iron heritage machinery bolted to the floor that the previous owner refuses to move. Well, Vic, she said, her voice tight, that is a sweet sentiment, really. But those machines are dangerous. They are rusty. Think of the children. Tetanus. Liability. The insurance costs alone would be astronomical if we keep that heavy equipment there. It really would be better for the flow of the space if we just cleared everything out. We can take photos of them before we scrap them. Framed photos are much safer. Scrap them. The word hit me like a hammer. She didn't care about the history. She didn't care about the art. She had used the word dangerous to cover up the word inconvenient. I looked at Jason. He was looking at his wife, not at me. He was waiting for her signal. I pulled my hand back from his. The moment of connection was broken. The foundation of their pitch had just cracked. If they truly wanted to honor Beatrice, they would have embraced the machines that were her life's work. By refusing to keep even 3 items, they proved that the art center was just a Trojan horse, a pretty lie to get me to sign over the deed so they could bulldoze the place the moment my back was turned. I stood up slowly, my knees popping. I picked up the portfolio case and closed it. I need to think about it, I said. Tiffany stood up quickly. But Vic, the contractors are waiting. We have a schedule. I walked to the door and opened it. The cold wind blew in, chilling the room. I said I need to think about it. I repeated, my voice leaving no room for argument. Leave the donuts. Take the drawings. I will call you. Jason looked devastated, but Tiffany looked furious. She grabbed her purse, her knuckles white. As she walked past me, I smelled her perfume. It was expensive, floral, and suffocating. Don't take too long, Vic, she said, her voice dropping the sweet act for just a second. Opportunities don't last forever. I watched them get into their car. I watched them drive away. I closed the door and locked it. I walked back to the kitchen and poured the rest of my coffee down the sink. It had gone cold. They had almost had me. They had used my dead wife's memory as a weapon against me, and that was a mistake they were going to regret. I wasn't just suspicious anymore. Now I was offended. And an offended builder doesn't just patch the cracks. He tears down the whole structure and starts over. I picked up my phone. It was time to call Saul. It was time to make sure that whatever foundation they were planning to build would sink into the mud before they even laid the first brick. The drive to the industrial district was a journey back in time. I left the glass towers and the overpriced coffee shops of the city center behind and entered a world of rusted corrugated iron, cracked asphalt, and the heavy smell of diesel. This was my world. This was where things were made, not just traded. I pulled my truck up to the gate of Unit 4B. The warehouse looked like a fortress that had seen better days. The brickwork was solid Chicago common brick that could withstand a tornado. But the windows were grimy and the paint on the main sliding door was peeling in long gray strips. Big Mike was waiting for me by the gate. Mike has been managing this yard for 20 years. He is a man built like a fire hydrant, short, thick, and impossible to move. He was wiping his greasy hands on a rag, and he didn't look happy. I rolled down the window, and the cold wind hit my face. "Afternoon, boss," Mike said. He still called me boss even though I had retired 5 years ago. "Afternoon, Mike," I replied, killing the engine. "You sounded worried on the phone. What is going on?" Mike spit on the ground and nodded towards the perimeter fence. "We had a visitor yesterday, Vic. I didn't like the look of him. Guy in a suit, slicked back hair, driving a Lexus. He didn't come inside the gate, but he was walking the property line, taking pictures with a big fancy camera. He was focusing on the foundation, Vic. He was looking at the structural integrity." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It confirmed everything. Tiffany and Jason weren't just thinking about selling. They were actively marketing the property. They were sending scouts. "Did he say anything to you?" I asked, stepping out of the truck. Mike shook his head. "No. When he saw me coming with the dogs, he got back in his car and took off. But he wasn't looking at the building like a man who wants to rent a warehouse, Vic. He was looking at it like a man who wants to knock it down." I nodded. I knew exactly what that look was. I had been that man many times in my career. You look for the weak points. You calculate the cost of demolition. "Thanks, Mike," I said. "Keep the dogs out tonight. And keep the gate chain double locked." I walked past him to the back of my truck. I didn't come here just to inspect. I came to work. I pulled out my portable welding rig and a heavy steel toolbox. Mike raised an eyebrow. "You planning on doing some repairs, boss?" he asked. "Something like that," I muttered. "I am going to make sure that even if they get a key, they can't get in." I hauled the gear to the side entrance. This was the door Jason had the key to. It was a standard heavy-duty steel door with a deadbolt, strong but not invincible. A locksmith could drill it out in 5 minutes. Tiffany would hire a locksmith without blinking. I needed something better. I needed a dead man's latch. I put on my welding mask and fired up the torch. The blue arc hissed and popped, lighting up the gloom of the alleyway. I wasn't just welding. I was meditating. The smell of ozone and burning metal cleared my head. I cut a slot into the steel frame deep inside where it couldn't be seen. Then I welded a heavy steel bar on the inside of the door, connected to a spring-loaded mechanism that I had designed years ago for securing job sites in bad neighborhoods. It was a trick. From the outside, the key would turn, the handle would move, but the door wouldn't budge. Unless you knew exactly where to insert a thin metal rod into a tiny invisible hole in the frame to disengage the inner bar, that door was part of the wall. I ground the welds down until they were smooth. I painted over the scorch marks with gray primer. When I was done, it looked exactly as it had before. But now it was a vault. I packed up my tools and went inside through the loading dock. The air inside the warehouse was still and cold. It smelled of oil ink and old paper. It smelled like Beatrice. I walked down the central aisle. The warehouse was cavernous. Shadows stretched long across the concrete floor. To an outsider, it looked chaotic. To me, it was a library of mechanics. There were rows of shelving units filled with gears, flywheels, and type cases. And there, in the center under heavy canvas tarps, were the queens of her collection. I walked up to the largest shape. I pulled back the tarp. The cast iron gleamed in the dim light. It was a Chandler and Price letterpress from 1890. It weighed 2,000 pounds. Beatrice had spent 3 years restoring it. She had scrubbed every inch of rust with a toothbrush. She had machined new parts when the old ones were too worn. I ran my hand over the cold metal of the flywheel. I could almost feel her hands guiding mine. She loved these machines because they were honest. You put ink in, you pressed paper down, and you got the truth out. No hidden fees, no fine print. As I checked the machine, making sure the oil hadn't dried out, I noticed something odd. The feed tray where the paper goes in was closed. Beatrice never left the feed tray closed. She always left it open to prevent the springs from wearing out. I frowned. I reached out and pulled the tray open. There was something inside. A standard white envelope sealed with tape. It had my name on it. Vic. Written in her looping, elegant handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't seen that handwriting since the hospital. My hands, which had been steady enough to weld a perfect seam 10 minutes ago, started to shake. I picked up the envelope. It felt light. I tore it open carefully. Inside was a single sheet of yellow legal pad paper. "My dearest Vic," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone and you have come to check on the girls." That was what she called the presses. "I know you, Vic. You are worrying about the dust. You are worrying about the roof leaks, but I need you to worry about something else." I sat down heavily on a wooden crate. The silence of the warehouse seemed to press in on me. "I need to warn you about Jason," the letter continued. "I love our son. God knows I love him. But you and I both know that he is weak. He has a good heart, but he has no spine. He is a leaf in the wind, Vic, and Tiffany is a hurricane." I closed my eyes. Hearing her say it, reading the words in her own hand, made it real in a way that my own suspicions never could. "She came to see me at the hospital while you were parking the car last month," the letter went on. "She didn't ask how I was feeling. She asked if I had a will. She asked who the executor was." I saw the look in her eyes, Vic. It is a hungry look. She will eat him alive, and she will come for everything we built. Do not let Jason have the money directly. He will give it all to her, and she will spend it on things that don't matter. And when it is gone, she will leave him. I have seen it happen before. I wiped a tear from my cheek with the back of my dusty glove. B had been sharper than any of us. Laying in a hospital bed dying, she had seen the truth that I had tried to ignore. "Protect him from himself, Vic," the letter ended. "Keep the warehouse. Keep the trust. Make him earn it. If he cannot stand on his own 2 feet, do not give him a crutch made of gold. He will only beat himself to death with it. I love you, my stubborn builder. Love, B." I folded the letter and put it in the inside pocket of my coat right next to my heart. A cold anger washed over me, replacing the sadness. Tiffany had interrogated my dying wife about the will. She had stalked the hospital room like a vulture waiting for a carcass. I stood up. The sound of my boots on the concrete was loud and sharp. I looked at the presses. They weren't just machines anymore. They were witnesses. They were the legacy that B had fought to protect, and now I was their guardian. I pulled the tarp back over the press, covering it gently, like I was tucking a child into bed. "Don't worry, B," I whispered into the darkness. I got the message. I walked back towards the exit. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had a job to do. The latch on the door was just the first step. If Tiffany and Jason wanted a war, they were going to get one. But they weren't fighting a lonely old man anymore. They were fighting the ghost of Beatrice Stone, and she was a hell of a lot tougher than they ever gave her credit for. I locked the door, tested the handle, and felt the solid, immovable resistance of the steel bar inside. Let them come. Let them bring their locksmiths and their appraisers. This door was closed, and the only thing opening up was a world of pain for anyone who tried to force it. The silence in my house used to be peaceful, but lately it felt like the silence of a job site right before a demolition charge goes off. 2 days after I reinforced the warehouse door, I decided to check the wall safe in my study. It wasn't a paranoia thing. It was a habit. When you work in construction, you check your tools at the start of the day, and you check them at the end. My assets were my tools now. The safe was hidden behind a framed photo of the first skyscraper I ever worked on, a black and white shot of me and the crew eating sandwiches on a steel beam 50 stories up. I moved the picture and spun the dial. The combination was Beatrice's birthday. I had never changed it. Only 3 people in the world knew that sequence: Mrs. Beatrice and Jason. When the heavy steel door swung open, my stomach dropped faster than a freight elevator with a cut cable. I didn't need to do an inventory. I knew exactly what was supposed to be there, and I knew exactly what was missing. The velvet box that held Beatrice's pearl necklace, the one I bought her when we finally paid off the mortgage in '95, was gone. But what hit me harder was the empty space on the shelf next to it. My Rolex Submariner. It wasn't one of those flashy diamond-encrusted things you see rappers wearing. It was a 1978 stainless steel model that I bought with the profit from my first solo contract. It had scratches on the crystal from concrete dust. It had a dent on the bezel from when I hit it against a rebar column. That watch was the map of my career. It was the proof that I had built something from nothing. And it was gone. I stood there for a long time. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I just felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. There was no sign of forced entry. The window locks were intact. The alarm hadn't been triggered. This was an inside job, and there was only one person with the combination and the desperation to do it. I closed the safe. I spun the dial. Then I walked to the phone and called my son. "I need you to come over, Jason," I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. "Is everything okay, Dad?" he asked. He sounded breathless, like he had been running. "Just come over, now." He arrived 20 minutes later. He walked into the study trying to look casual, but he was vibrating with nervous energy. He was wearing a long-sleeved dress shirt even though it was a warm afternoon. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He looked at the bookshelf. He looked at the rug. He looked everywhere except at his father. "What is up, Dad?" he asked, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Tiffany is waiting for me. We have a dinner reservation." I sat behind my desk. I didn't offer him a seat. "I opened the safe today, Jason," I said, watching him closely. He flinched. It was small, just a twitch of his shoulder, but I saw it. "Oh," he said, his voice going up an octave. "And your mother's pearls are gone. And my Submariner is gone." Jason let out a forced, incredulous laugh. "Gone? What do you mean, gone? Did you misplace them? You know, Dad, you have been forgetful lately. Maybe you moved them and forgot. The stress of the funeral." I slammed my hand down on the desk. The sound made him jump a foot in the air. "Do not insult my intelligence," I growled. "I know exactly where I put them. They were stolen. And since there is no sign of a break-in, I am looking at the only suspect in the room." Jason's face turned red, then white. He took a step back, puffing out his chest in a poor imitation of righteous indignation. "Are you accusing me? I am your son? How dare you? I don't need your old watch." "Then who, Jason? Who else has the combination?" He looked around the room, his eyes darting frantically. "It must have been Maria," he blurted out. "The housekeeper. She is always snooping around. I told you not to trust her. These people, Dad, they see nice things and they can't help themselves. You leave the safe open one time." I stared at him, feeling a wave of disgust so strong I could taste bile. Maria had worked for us for 20 years. She had nursed Beatrice when the chemo got bad. She had cleaned up Jason's vomit when he came home drunk from college parties. She was a woman of honor, and my son was willing to throw her to the wolves to save his own skin. "Maria has been with us since you were in high school," I said quietly. "She has never taken a penny." "Well, people change," Jason snapped. He was sweating now, beads of perspiration forming on his forehead. "Look, Dad, just report it to the insurance. That is what it is for. Why make a big drama out of it? It is just stuff. You said it yourself, if you can't hold it, it isn't real. Well, now you can't hold it." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tic he had since he was a kid. As he raised his arm, his sleeve pulled back. Just for a second. But a second was all I needed. There on his left wrist was a pale band of skin. It was lighter than the rest of his arm. And right in the middle of that pale band were deep red indentations, the kind of marks left by a heavy steel watch bracelet that had been worn too tight, the kind of marks that take hours to fade. He had been wearing my watch, He had probably taken it off in the car right before he walked in the door. He had literally stripped the evidence off his body 5 minutes ago. I looked at that red mark on his wrist. It looked like a scar that marked the death of the boy I raised and the birth of the stranger standing in front of me. Beatrice was right. He wasn't just weak. He was compromised. He had stolen from his own father, and now he was trying to frame an innocent woman. I made a decision in that split second. If I confronted him now, he would deny it. He would say the mark was from his Apple Watch. He would gaslight me. He would cry. And I would accomplish nothing. No. I needed to let him think he had won. I needed to let him think I was the confused old man he wanted me to be. Because if he thought he was safe, he would get sloppy. And when he got sloppy, I would catch him in a trap he couldn't talk his way out of. I let my shoulders slump. I let out a long, tired sigh. I rubbed my eyes, feigning exhaustion. "Maybe you are right," I muttered. Jason stopped talking. He looked at me, surprised by my sudden surrender. "What?" he asked. "Maybe you are right," I repeated. "I have been foggy lately. Maybe I did move them. Maybe I put them in the bank box and forgot. I haven't been sleeping well since your mother passed." I saw the tension drain out of his body. He let out a breath he had been holding. A smug little smile touched the corners of his mouth. "See, Dad, I told you. You are just stressed. Look, don't worry about Maria. We won't call the cops on her yet. Just look around the house. I bet they turn up." "Yeah," I said, looking down at my desk so he wouldn't see the fire in my eyes. "I will look around." "Great," Jason said, checking his phone again. "Look, I really have to run. Tiffany gets crazy if I am late. Take it easy, okay? Get some rest." He turned and walked out of the study. He walked with a bounce in his step now. He thought he had pulled it off. He thought he had outsmarted the old contractor. I waited until I heard the front door close and his car engine start. Then I stood up and walked to the window. I watched him drive away in his leased luxury sedan. He had taken my watch. He had taken his mother's pearls. But he had lost something far more valuable. He had lost my protection. I wasn't his father anymore. I was an auditor, and the audit had just begun. I picked up the phone again. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It was a private investigator named Russo, a man who used to find workers who stole copper wiring from my job sites. "Russo, it is Vic Stone," I said when he answered. "I have a job for you. I need you to find out where a specific Rolex Submariner was pawned in the last 2 hours. And Russo, I want the receipt." I hung up. I wasn't going to call the police on Maria. I was going to build a case file, and when the time was right, I was going to drop it on Jason's head like a ton of bricks. The theft was the final nail. The renovation of my life was over. The demolition was about to begin. The next phase of my plan required me to swallow my pride, a pill that was harder to get down than any medication I had ever taken. I have never been a sick man. I have fallen off ladders, I have stepped on rusty nails, and I have breathed in enough concrete dust to pave a driveway, but I have never played the invalid. Until now. I knew that if I wanted the full picture, I had to be inside their fortress. I had to be invisible. And nothing makes a man more invisible to people like Tiffany than being old, sick, and useless. So I staged it. I waited until I was having Sunday coffee with them, and then I grabbed my chest. I let my breathing hitch. I slumped a little in the chair. It was a performance that would have shamed a bad actor, but fear makes people blind. Jason panicked immediately. He wanted to call an ambulance. But Tiffany, ever the calculator, saw an opportunity. If I was sick, I was dependent. And if I was dependent, I was malleable. She insisted I stay with them for a few days for observation. "Just to be safe," she said. I saw the gleam in her eye. She wasn't inviting a father-in-law into her home. She was dragging a prisoner into her dungeon. They put me in the guest room down the hall from the master suite. It was a cold, sterile room decorated in shades of gray and silver like the inside of a refrigerator. The sheets were that slippery, high-thread count silk that feels like you are sleeping on ice. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the high-tech air filtration system. It was 2 in the morning. The city outside was asleep, but I knew the occupants of this penthouse were not. My throat was dry, genuinely dry this time. I sat up. The bed made no noise. I had checked the floorboards earlier in the day when I pretended to stumble. The floors were glued-down engineered wood over a concrete slab. They were silent, perfect for a man who knows how to move without being heard. I had spent 40 years walking on unfinished framing beams. I could navigate a luxury hallway without making a sound. I opened the door a crack. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the faint blue glow of the security panel near the front door. I stepped out, my bare feet making no sound on the cold floor. I moved towards the kitchen, intending to get a glass of water, but then I heard it. A voice. Low. Urgent. Hissing like steam escaping a cracked pipe. It was Tiffany. She was in the living room, probably pacing near the window. I pressed myself against the wall, hiding in the shadow of a large abstract sculpture that looked like twisted metal. I held my breath. "I told you to stop calling this number at night," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "I am handling it. No, do not threaten me. You think I am scared of you? I am scared of losing everything, and that makes me dangerous." I froze. This wasn't a conversation with a friend. This wasn't a chat with a client. "Listen to me," she continued, her voice dropping lower, dripping with venom. "The old man is here. He is in the guest room right now. He is weak. His heart is giving out. I give him a month, maybe 2. He is confused. He is starting to forget things." I clenched my fists so hard my fingernails dug into my palms. Hearing your own death being discussed as a convenient scheduling update is a sensation I cannot describe. It made my blood run cold, then hot. She sounded like she was talking about a broken refrigerator that was finally about to be hauled away. "Yes, the warehouse," she snapped. "I know the timeline. Listen, I have been inside. It is a gold mine, but not the way you think. The land is obviously the main prize. I have the rezoning application ready to file the second the deed transfers. But the inside, it is full of cast iron, heavy machinery, Victorian-era scrap. I did the math. Even if we just melt it down, there is $200,000 in high-grade metal sitting there collecting dust. That covers the interest payments for 3 months." She paused, listening to the person on the other end. I could hear the tinny sound of a man shouting through the receiver, but I couldn't make out the words. "I know," Tiffany shouted in a whisper, a desperate sound. $2 million. I know the number. It is tattooed on my brain. You will get your 2 million. But you have to back off. If you foreclose on us now, you get nothing. The penthouse is leveraged. The cars are leased. If you pull the trigger now, we go bankrupt and you get pennies. But the old man's estate, that is clean. That is liquid. That is your payday. $2 million. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. $2 million. My son wasn't just in debt. He was buried alive. No wonder he had looked so desperate at the funeral. No wonder he had stolen my watch. He wasn't living the high life. He was treading water in the middle of the ocean with an anvil tied to his ankle. And Tiffany. She wasn't trying to save him. She was trying to survive. She was negotiating my life against their debt. "Just give me the time," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I am working on him. He trusts Jason. We are going to get him to sign the power of attorney. He thinks he is signing medical release forms. We have it all planned. Once I have that signature, I can liquidate the warehouse assets before he even knows what happened. We pay you off, we sell the land to the developers, and everyone walks away happy. Just don't call the house again." She hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. I heard the clink of glass against a bottle. She was drinking. I stood there in the shadows, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. A power of attorney. That was the game. They weren't going to wait for me to die. They were going to declare me incompetent. They were going to trick me into signing away my rights while pretending to care about my health. It was evil. It was calculated. And it was exactly the kind of plan a desperate, soulless person would make. I realized then that I wasn't dealing with family anymore. I was dealing with a demolition crew. They had planted the dynamite, and they were just waiting to light the fuse. I slowly backed away. I moved inch by inch, careful not to let my breathing betray me. I slipped back into the guest room and closed the door until the latch clicked silently into place. I climbed back into the cold, silky bed. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I lay there staring at the ceiling, but I wasn't afraid. The shock had passed. The hurt had passed. Now there was only clarity. I knew the stakes, $2 million. I knew the timeline, immediate, and I knew the weapon. A power of attorney hidden in a stack of medical forms. They wanted a signature, fine. I would give them a signature. But it wouldn't be on a power of attorney. It would be on a document that would blow their entire plan to pieces. I lay there in the dark and started to construct a new blueprint in my mind. It was complex. It was dangerous. But I had built bridges over rushing rivers before. I knew how to work under pressure. Tomorrow I would play the part of the sick, confused old man better than I ever had. I would let them think they were winning. I would let them bring me the papers. And while they were focused on the bait, I would be preparing the snare. $2 million. They were drowning, and they thought I was their life raft. They were about to find out that I was actually the anchor. The next morning, I waited until Tiffany left for her Pilates class, and Jason locked himself in his home office. I didn't sneak out. I walked out. I told the housekeeper I was going to the pharmacy to pick up my heart medication. It was a half-truth. I was going to get medicine, but not for my heart. I was going to get a cure for the cancer that was eating my family alive. I took a cab to the north side of the city, to a brownstone building that smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. This was the office of Saul Berkowitz. Saul has been my lawyer for 40 years. He wrote the contracts for my first company. He handled the liability suits when a crane dropped a load of steel on my site in '89. He was the one who helped me organize Beatrice's funeral. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a vault of secrets. When I walked in, Saul looked up from his mahogany desk. He is a small man with thick glasses and a mind like a steel trap. He didn't ask why I wasn't resting. He didn't ask about my blood pressure. He took one look at my face and reached for a yellow legal pad. "Sit down, Vic," he said, his voice raspy from years of cigars. "You look like a man who is about to pour concrete over a body." I sat down in the leather chair that creaked under my weight. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told him everything. I told him about the conversation I heard in the night. I told him about the $2 million debt. I told him about the appraisal papers and the plan to declare me incompetent. Saul listened without interrupting. He tapped his pen against the desk, a rhythmic sound that usually meant he was thinking 3 moves ahead. When I finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. $2 million, he muttered. "That boy isn't just in a hole, Vic. He is in a grave, and his wife is trying to use your bones to build a ladder to climb out." "Exactly," I said. "And if I just refuse to sign the power of attorney, they will find another way. They will forge it. Or they will find a crooked doctor to certify that I am senile. I need a fail-safe, Saul. I need a mechanism that triggers if they try to bypass me. Saul put his glasses back on. What do you have in mind? I want to change the status of the warehouse, I said, leaning forward. Beatrice wanted it to be a museum. Tiffany wants to sell it as land. I want you to draft a deed of transfer. We are going to turn the warehouse and everything inside it into a historical preservation trust. Saul started writing. Okay, standard procedure. We can set that up. It will take a few weeks to file with the state. No, I interrupted. I don't want it filed yet. I want it executed but dormant. Saul stopped writing. He looked at me confused. Explain. I want the deed to transfer ownership from me personally to the National Historical Society automatically upon the occurrence of a specific event. That event is any unauthorized structural alteration to the building or its contents without my written consent. Saul whistled low. A poison pill. You are booby-trapping the property. I nodded. Exactly. If they wait for me to die naturally, the will handles it. But if they try to break in, if they try to unlock, if they try to scrap those machines while I am still breathing, the moment they damage the property, they are no longer damaging my property. They are damaging a federally protected trust. It stops being a civil dispute and becomes a criminal act. Saul leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. This is aggressive, Vic. Extremely aggressive. If this triggers, they lose the asset completely. The Historical Society gets the land. The debt collectors get nothing. And your son, well, he is left holding the bag for $2 million. He will face bankruptcy, maybe worse. I looked at the wall at a framed picture of Saul and me fishing on Lake Michigan 20 years ago. Jason was in the boat with us, a teenager then untangling a fishing line. He had been so patient back then. So different. He is already facing worse. Saul, I said quietly. He is living with a woman who is willing to kill his father by stress and deceptions to save her own skin. If I bail him out now, if I sell the warehouse and pay his debt, he learns nothing. He stays with her. They burn through the money in 5 years. And then what? Then I am dead. The legacy is gone and he is back in the hole. But bankruptcy. Saul pressed his eyes full of concern. It destroys a man's name. It builds character, I countered. I went bankrupt in '79. You remember. I lost everything. I had to work double shifts for 3 years to buy my first truck back. But I learned the value of $1. I learned who my real friends were. Jason has never had to sweat for his survival. He needs to hit the bottom so he can find a solid place to push off from. Saul sighed, shaking his head slowly. You are a hard man, Victor Stone. I am a builder, Saul. Sometimes you have to demolish the rot before you can renovate. He picked up his pen again. All right. We will draft it as a conditional deed of transfer. We will need to define unauthorized alteration very carefully. We will include specific language about the machinery. If they so much as scratch paint off that linotype, the title transfers instantly. We spent the next 2 hours hammering out the details. The legal language had to be watertight. We defined the trigger event as any use of industrial cutting tools, forced entry or removal of assets valued over $100. We set the beneficiary as the National Historical Society, with a specific clause that the site must be preserved as a museum of typography. When the document was ready, Saul printed it out on heavy bond paper. He slid it across the desk to me. I picked up his fountain pen. It felt heavy in my hand. Before you sign, Vic, Saul said softly, putting his hand on the paper. I have to ask you as your friend, not your lawyer. Are you sure? Once you sign this and once they trip the wire, there is no going back. You are essentially handing your son over to the wolves. I looked at the signature line. I thought about Tiffany's voice on the phone. I thought about the red mark on Jason's wrist where my watch used to be. I thought about Beatrice's letter. I am not handing him to the wolves. Saul, I said, my voice steady. I am saving him from the shark that is sleeping in his bed. She is the one dragging him down. This trap, it is not for him. It is for her. She is the one with the bolt cutters. She is the one driving this. If Jason has any decency left, he will try to stop her. If he doesn't, then he deserves what is coming. I signed my name. Victor J. Stone. The ink was black and permanent. I handed the document back to Saul. Keep this in your safe. If I call you or if you hear that I have been incapacitated, you file this immediately. Saul nodded, placing the document in a red folder stamped confidential. It is done. I stood up to leave. I felt lighter. The trap was set. The legal C4 was planted. Now all I had to do was go back to the penthouse, play the role of the fragile old man, and wait for Tiffany to light the fuse. Take care of yourself, Vic Saul said as I opened the door. And try not to give them a reason to kill you tonight. I buttoned my coat. Don't worry, Saul, I am not going to die. I have a ribbon-cutting ceremony to attend. I walked out into the cold Chicago air. The wind bit at my face, but I welcomed it. It felt real. Unlike the air in that penthouse, this air was honest. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of the Lion's Den. I was going back in, and this time I was bringing the law with me. The next few days were going to be a masterpiece of acting. I had to convince them that the warehouse was unguarded, that I was unaware, and that the prize was just waiting to be taken. I closed my eyes and rehearsed my lines. It was time for the final performance. The suitcase I packed was a prop. It was a battered leather weekender that I had carried on job sites for 30 years, but today it was filled mostly with old newspapers and a few flannel shirts to give it weight. I stood in the foyer of my son's penthouse looking at the two people who were supposed to be my family. I leaned heavily on a cane that I didn't actually need. I had bought it at a pharmacy on the way over. It was the final touch to the costume of the frail, defeated old man they wanted to see. Jason, Tiffany, I said, keeping my voice low and raspy. The doctor says I need warm air. He says the Chicago damp is getting into my bones. I am going down to Boca Raton for 2 weeks. I have an old friend there who has a guest room. The reaction was immediate and visceral. It was like watching a tension wire snap. Tiffany didn't even try to hide her relief. Her shoulders dropped 2 inches. The tight line of her jaw relaxed. For weeks I had been the obstacle standing between her and her payday. Now the obstacle was voluntarily removing itself from the equation. "Oh, Vic, that is such a wonderful idea," she gushed, stepping forward but stopping short of actually hugging me. "You really do look tired. The sun will do you a world of good." 2 weeks, are you sure that is long enough? Maybe you should stay a month, just to be safe. She was practically packing my bags for me. I looked at Jason. He was chewing on his thumbnail, a habit he only did when his conscience was eating him alive. He looked at me, then at the floor. "Yeah, Dad," he mumbled. "Florida is nice. Have a safe flight." He didn't ask which flight. He didn't offer to drive me to the airport. He just wanted me gone. The realization stung, but the pain was dull now. It was like pressing on an old bruise. I shifted the weight on my cane and reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out the heavy brass key ring. It jingled loudly in the quiet hallway. There were 4 keys on it, one for the main gate padlock, one for the side door deadbolt, and 2 smaller ones for the utility cabinets. They were real keys. They really did open locks. They just didn't open the locks that mattered. The moment the metal chimed, Tiffany's eyes locked onto my hand. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hunger. It was the look of a junkie seeing a needle or a shark seeing blood in the water. She stopped breathing for a second. Her pupils dilated. She wasn't looking at brass and steel. She was looking at $2 million. She was looking at her salvation. I held the keys out, but I didn't let go of them immediately. I wanted to see if they had any restraint left. I am leaving these with you, I said slowly, looking directly at Jason. I know you said you wanted to start planning for the art center. You can go in and take some measurements. Check the humidity levels. Maybe bring a contractor in to look at the HVAC. But Jason listened to me. I waited until he lifted his head and met my gaze. Do not touch the machines, I said, putting a slight tremor in my voice to mask the steel underneath. Not yet. I want to be there when we move them. They are delicate. Just measurements, okay? Promise me. Jason nodded, reaching for the keys. I promise, Dad. Just measurements. We won't touch a thing. But before his fingers could graze the metal, Tiffany's hand shot out. She snatched the keys from my grip with a speed that was almost frightening. She clutched them to her chest, her knuckles turning white. We will take great care of everything, Vic, she said, and her voice was breathless. Do not worry about a thing. Go relax. Go sit on the beach. Leave the heavy lifting to us. I looked at her hand clutched around the keys. She had no idea she was holding a detonator. The key to the side door would work perfectly. It would slide in. It would turn. The bolt would retract. But because I had welded that secondary dead man's latch on the inside, the door wouldn't open more than 1/4 of an inch. It would feel like it was jammed. It would feel like it was stuck on a piece of debris. And that is exactly what I wanted. Because a jammed door invites force. A jammed door makes people impatient. If the key hadn't worked at all, they might have called me. But a door that opens a crack, that is a tease. That begs to be kicked. That begs to be pried. And eventually it begs for a locksmith with a drill or a bolt cutter. And the second that metal touches metal, the legal trap snaps shut. I let go of the keys. I had physically handed them the instrument of their own destruction. Well, I said, adjusting my hat. I better get going. Don't want to miss my flight. I turned towards the elevator. My steps were slow, heavy. I waited. I waited for one of them to say, I love you. I waited for one of them to say, call us when you land. I waited for a single shred of humanity to surface through the layers of greed. But there was silence. I pressed the call button. The elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside and turned around. They were still standing in the hallway. Jason was looking at his feet. Tiffany was looking at the keys in her hand. She was turning them over and over, mesmerized. She didn't even look up as the doors began to close. She was already mentally spending the money. She was already imagining the bulldozers flattening Beatrice's legacy. As the sliver of light narrowed and the doors shut with a final thud, I dropped the act. I straightened my back. I hooked the cane over my arm. I wasn't going to the airport. I wasn't going to Florida. I took the elevator down to the lobby, but I didn't get into a taxi. I walked around the corner to where I had parked my truck in a loading zone. I tossed the suitcase into the passenger seat. I climbed in and started the engine. The rumble of the V8 was comforting. It was a real sound in a fake world. I checked my watch. It was 4 in the afternoon. I figured I had about 6 hours. They would wait until dark. They wouldn't want neighbors or inspectors seeing them. They would wait until the city went to sleep, thinking that the darkness would hide them. They didn't know that I had spent the last 2 days installing infrared trail cameras in the alleyway. They didn't know that I had rented a nondescript cargo van that was currently parked across the street from the warehouse, equipped with a monitor and a thermos of strong black coffee. I pulled out into traffic, heading not south towards the sunshine, but west towards the industrial district. My heart was heavy, but my hands were steady on the wheel. I had given them every chance. I had given them the warning. I had given them the condition. Now I had given them the keys. Whatever happened next was their choice. I was just the inspector coming to fail the building. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the rats to come out to play. The rental van smelled of stale cigarettes and pine air freshener, a combination that usually made my stomach turn, but tonight I didn't even notice it. I was parked across the street from the warehouse, tucked between a dumpster and a broken street lamp. On the side of the van, it said Johnson Plumbing, a magnetic decal I had slapped on before leaving the rental lot. To anyone passing by, I was just a contractor on an emergency call or a worker sleeping off a double shift. I poured another cup of black coffee from my thermos and settled back into the driver's seat. My flight to Florida had departed 3 hours ago. By now, Tiffany and Jason probably thought I was ordering a margarita in a first-class cabin. In reality, I was wearing 2 layers of thermal underwear and watching a small LCD monitor glowing green on the dashboard. Patience is a tool just like a hammer or a level. Most people today don't know how to use it. They want instant gratification. They want the money now, the house now, the success now. But I have spent my life watching concrete cure. I know that if you rush the process, you get cracks. So I waited. The first night was a test of endurance. The industrial district is a ghost town after dark. The wind howled through the alleyways, rattling the chain-link fences. Nothing moved except for the occasional stray cat and the swirling debris of the city. I watched the screen until my eyes burned, monitoring the feed from the 4 infrared cameras I had hidden in the eaves of the warehouse. Nothing. Just silence and shadows. It gave me a lot of time to think. I thought about the days when Beatrice would bring me lunch here, how we would sit on the loading dock and eat sandwiches, dreaming about the future. I wondered if I had failed Jason, or if he was just born with a hollow space where his backbone should be. The sun came up gray and bleak. I drove the van to a truck stop a few miles away, slept for 4 hours, showered, and came right back. I wasn't going to miss a second. I knew Tiffany. She was efficient. She wouldn't wait long. My instinct was right. On the second night at exactly 2:14 in the morning, headlights swept across the brick facade of Unit 4B. It wasn't Jason's sedan. It was a black SUV, an Escalade heavily tinted. It moved slowly, prowling like a predator. I sat up straight, the stiffness in my joints vanishing instantly. I adjusted the contrast on the monitor. The SUV stopped right in front of the side gate. The headlights turned off, plunging the alley back into darkness. But on my screen, the scene was as clear as day. 3 figures stepped out. I recognized the first 2 immediately. Jason was wearing a hoodie, looking around nervously, practically vibrating with anxiety. Tiffany was dressed in dark clothes, moving with a sharp, aggressive purpose. But it was the third figure that made my grip tighten on the steering wheel. He was a tall man, thin, wearing a long trench coat and carrying a heavy metallic case. I didn't know his name, but I knew his type. He was a fence, a liquidator. The kind of guy who buys no questions asked and pays in cash. He wasn't here to appraise the historical value. He was here to weigh the metal. They approached the side door. I switched the audio feed on. The microphone I had hidden behind the rain gutter picked up the crunch of their shoes on the gravel and the distant hum of the city, but their voices came through clear enough. "This is the place," Tiffany whispered, gesturing at the building like she owned it. "My father-in-law says it is just junk, but I know there are heavy industrial units inside. Pre-war cast iron." The tall man didn't say anything. He just nodded and tapped his watch. He was on a schedule. "Open it," Tiffany hissed at Jason. Jason was standing in front of the door, the key ring I had given him clutching in his hand. He was staring at the steel door like it was the gate to hell. He wasn't moving. "Jason," Tiffany snapped, her voice rising. "What are you waiting for?" I don't know, Tiff," Jason stammered. His voice was shaking. "Dad said not to touch anything. He said we could just measure. This guy, he has tools. He looks like he is going to take things apart." I leaned closer to the monitor. This was it, the moment of truth. My son was standing on the precipice. All he had to do was walk away. All he had to do was say no. The tall man let out an impatient sigh. Look, lady, I don't have all night. Either we are doing business or I am leaving. I have a crew waiting for the signal to bring the truck. Jason turned to Tiffany. Tiff, let's just wait until Dad gets back. We can ask him. The sound of the slap was sharp and brutal. It echoed in the small cabin of my van like a gunshot. I flinched physically. On the screen, I saw Jason's head snap to the side. He stumbled back at his hand going to his cheek. Tiffany had hit him. She had hit him hard. Open the damn door, Jason, she snarled, her face twisted into a mask of pure fury. I didn't see a loving wife anymore. I saw a monster. We are $2 million in the hole, you idiot. Do you want to go to jail? Do you want to lose the penthouse? Open the door right now. Are you a man or a mouse? Jason looked at her. He looked at the tall man. Then he looked at the key in his hand. I saw his shoulders slump. I saw the last bit of resistance leave his body. He was broken. She had broken him completely. I am a man, he whispered, but he sounded like a child. Then prove it, she spat. Jason turned back to the door. He inserted the key into the lock. I held my breath. This was the moment I had engineered. The key would turn, the bolt would slide, but the door wouldn't open. And that resistance would lead to the next step, the step that would seal their fate forever. I watched my son try to turn the handle. He pushed. The door moved a fraction of an inch and stopped dead, held by the hidden bar I had welded inside. It is stuck, Jason said, jiggling the handle. Let me do it, Tiffany shoved him aside. She grabbed the handle and threw her weight against the door. It clanked loudly but didn't budge. It is just jammed. It is old. She turned to the tall man. You said you have tools. Open it. The man smiled a cold, predatory smile. He placed his heavy case on the ground and unlatched it. I saw the glint of steel inside. A portable angle grinder, a pry bar, a set of bolt cutters. Stand back, the man said. I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over the record button on the app connected to the cameras. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was collecting evidence. The second that tool touched my door, they were no longer family. They were felons. And I was going to make sure the law knew exactly who swung the hammer. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold and bitter, just like the scene playing out in front of me. Go ahead, I whispered to the screen. Cut the lock. Cut your ties to me. Cut your future into pieces. I am watching. The standoff at the steel door didn't last long. I watched on the monitor as Tiffany kicked the metal panel with her expensive boot. She was screaming something that the microphone picked up only as distorted static, but her body language was loud and clear. She was furious. She turned on Jason, shoving him hard enough that he stumbled back into the gravel. It was painful to watch. My son, a grown man cowering before his wife like a dog that had chewed a slipper. He waved his hands, pleading, pointing at the lock, likely trying to tell her that force wasn't the answer. But Tiffany wasn't interested in answers. She was interested in results. She turned to the tall man in the trench coat. He was leaning against the brick wall, bored, checking his fingernails. She pointed at the door and then made a slashing motion across her throat. It was a command. The man nodded slowly. He didn't look like a burglar. He looked like a surgeon about to perform an amputation. He knelt down and opened his heavy metal case again. From my vantage point in the van, I saw him pull out a plasma cutter. It was a serious piece of equipment, portable, but powerful, the kind used to slice through structural beams in demolition zones. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. This wasn't just breaking and entering anymore. This was destruction. This was the exact trigger event Saul and I had written into the trust document. The moment that torch lit up the property would legally transfer out of my hands and into the hands of the National Historical Society. They were about to burn their own inheritance to the ground. I picked up my phone. My hand was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pressed the record button. I needed a backup. The cameras on the building were recording to the cloud, but I needed this perspective. I needed to document the exact moment they crossed the line. The tall man pulled down a dark visor. He adjusted the valve on the gas canister. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he ignited the torch. A blinding blue-white light flared up in the alleyway. Even on the black-and-white monitor, the intensity was overwhelming. Then came the sound. A high-pitched screaming hiss that cut through the silence of the night like a physical blow. It was the sound of metal dying. I watched as he applied the flame to the area around the lock. Sparks showered down like a fountain of molten gold, bouncing off the concrete and sizzling in the damp air. I saw Jason flinch and cover his ears, turning his face away. He knew this was wrong. Deep down in whatever was left of his conscience, he knew this was a violation. But he didn't stop it. He stood there paralyzed by his debt and his fear of his wife watching a stranger burn his father's house down. I sat in the dark van whispering a narration into the phone's microphone. It is 2:25 in the morning. Subject identified as Tiffany Stone has authorized the use of a plasma cutting torch on the secured entrance of Unit 4B. My son Jason Stone is present and compliant. They are bypassing the deadlock. This is a felony act of destruction of property. Saying the words out loud made them real. It stripped away the last layer of denial. These weren't my children anymore. They were defendants. The cutting took 10 minutes. 10 minutes of screeching metal and flying sparks. To me, it felt like 10 years. Every second the torch burned, it was severing a connection. It was burning through the memories of teaching Jason to ride a bike. It was burning through the Christmas dinners. It was burning through the promise I made to Beatrice to look after him. I was looking after him, I told myself. I was letting him hit the bottom so he could finally learn how to climb. Suddenly the noise stopped. The silence that rushed back into the alley was deafening. The tall man stood up and kicked the door near the handle. There was a heavy clang, and then a groan of yielding steel. The door swung inward, hanging loosely on its melted hinges. The barrier was gone. Tiffany didn't wait. She didn't check for alarms. She didn't hesitate. She scrambled over the cooling slag on the threshold and disappeared into the darkness of the warehouse. Her greed was a physical force pulling her forward. Jason followed her, but slowly looking over his shoulder one last time as if he expected me to jump out of the shadows. I switched the camera view on my monitor. I had 4 cameras inside. Camera 2 covered the main floor. The feed was grainy in the low light, but the infrared illuminators turned the scene into a ghostly green landscape. I saw Tiffany running down the central aisle. She was using the flashlight on her phone, the beam jerking frantically from side to side. She was looking for crates. She was looking for stacks of copper. She was looking for anything that shined. "Where is it?" I heard her voice over the audio feed. It was echoing in the vast empty space. "Oh, where is the inventory?" She stopped in the middle of the floor. The flashlight beam swept over the shapes covered in heavy canvas tarps. She ran to the nearest one, the massive linotype machine. She grabbed the corner of the tarp and ripped it off with a savage motion. Dust billowed up into the air, swirling in the flashlight beam. The machine underneath was revealed. It was a beast of black cast iron complex, oily and utterly incomprehensible to someone like Tiffany. To her, it didn't look like a marvel of engineering. It looked like a 1-ton paperweight. She stared at it. She kicked the base of the machine. "What is this?" she screamed. Her voice cracked with hysteria. She ran to the next tarp and tore it down. A Heidelberg windmill press. Beautiful. Classic. And to her completely worthless. She ran to the third one. Beatrice's workbench. Just tools, vices, and drawers full of lead type. She spun around in a circle, shining the light into the empty corners of the warehouse. There were no pallets of aluminum. There were no spools of copper wire. There were no hidden safes full of cash. There was just history. Heavy, immovable, unsellable history. "This is junk," she shrieked. The sound was raw, primal. "It is all just junk, old iron. You can't even move this without a crane." The tall man walked in behind her. He shone his own flashlight on the linotype. He whistled low. "Lady is right," he said, his voice echoing. "This is cast iron, heavy duty, but it is museum pieces. I can't scrap this. It is too recognizable, and the labor to break it down. It would cost more than the metal is worth. You need a specialized crew to even lift this stuff." Tiffany turned on Jason, who was standing by the door, looking at his mother's machines with a strange expression on his face. "You lied to me," she screamed, rushing at him and pounding her fists against his chest. "You said he was rich. You said he had assets. This is a graveyard. We broke in for nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." Jason didn't defend himself. He just stood there taking the blows. He looked at the printing press. He reached out and touched the cold metal of the flywheel. Maybe he remembered playing on it as a kid. Maybe he remembered his mother's hands covered in ink. "It is not junk, Tiff," he whispered. "It is Mom's collection." "I don't care about your dead mother's collection," Tiffany roared, her face contorted in the green light of the camera. "I care about the $2 million we owe by Friday. We are dead, Jason. We are dead." I sat in the van watching her unravel. It was a pathetic sight. She had broken the law, destroyed property, and betrayed her family, all for a payday that never existed in the form she imagined. She was standing in the middle of a fortune, but because she lacked the soul to understand it, she saw only poverty. I reached for the ignition key of the van. The evidence was secured. The crime was committed. The trap was sprung. It was time to introduce the consequences. I started the engine. I didn't turn on the headlights. I just let the engine idle for a moment, gathering my strength. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was the enforcement. I picked up my phone and dialed 3 digits. 911. "Emergency, what is your location?" the operator asked. "I am at 4B Industrial Way." I said, my voice flat and cold. "I would like to report a break-in in progress. The perpetrators are armed with industrial cutting tools, and they are still inside." I hung up. I watched the screen. Tiffany was still screaming. Jason was crying. The tall man was packing up his tools, sensing that the job had gone south. But he was too late. We were all too late. The sirens were already wailing in the distance, getting louder with every heartbeat. The warehouse was a cathedral of industry, silent and majestic until tonight, but now it echoed with the sounds of a frantic, violent desecration. I watched on the monitor as Tiffany lost the last shred of her composure. She wasn't just searching anymore. She was attacking. She had grabbed a heavy iron wrench from the workbench, a tool my wife had used to gently calibrate the delicate pressure settings of the presses, and she was swinging it like a weapon. "Where is it?" she screamed, her voice tearing through the stale air of the warehouse. "Where is the real money?" She struck the side of the 1920 linotype machine. The sound was a sickening, dull thud against the cast iron body. She hit it again and again, chipping the black enamel paint that Beatrice had painstakingly restored with a tiny brush. "You lied to me, Jason," she shrieked, spinning around to face my son, who was standing paralyzed near the loading bay door. "You said he had millions stashed away. You said he didn't trust banks. You said there would be gold bars or bearer bonds or cash in the walls. Look at this. Look at this garbage. It is just heavy, dirty, useless junk." She ran to the drawers of the type cabinet. These were shallow wooden drawers, hundreds of them, holding thousands of individual lead letters organized by font and size. It was a collection that had taken 40 years to assemble. Tiffany pulled a drawer out and dumped it onto the concrete floor. The lead type spilled out with a sound like metallic rain. Thousands of tiny letters, the building blocks of history, were scattered into the dirt. She stomped on them, crushing the soft lead under her designer boots. "Gold," she yelled, pulling out another drawer and throwing it across the room. "I need gold. I need liquidity. I cannot pay the sharks with rusted iron. Jason, do you understand? They are going to break my legs." I watched her unravel. It was a terrifying sight. This was a woman who prided herself on her image, on her control. But strip away the credit cards and the penthouse, and this was what was left. A wild animal trapped in a corner, biting at the walls. Jason took a step forward. He looked sick. He looked at the spilled type on the floor, and I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He remembered. He used to play with those letters. He used to spell out his name on the floor while his mother worked. "Tiff, stop," he said, his voice weak. "You are destroying it." "I am destroying it." She laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "I am looking for the safe. It has to be inside the machines. That is where he hid it. That sneaky old man." She raised the wrench again, aiming for the delicate gear mechanism of the Heidelberg press. "Don't!" Jason shouted, rushing forward. He grabbed her arm. She spun around and shoved him back with surprising strength. He stumbled and fell against the side of the main printing press. As he scrambled to regain his balance, his hand brushed against a small rectangular object bolted to the frame of the machine. It was polished brass. Even in the gloom, it caught the light from Tiffany's fallen flashlight. Jason froze. He squinted, leaning closer to the plate. He wiped a layer of dust away with his thumb. I zoomed the camera in. I knew exactly what he was reading. I had screwed that plate on myself 3 days ago, right after I got the papers from Saul. "What is this?" Jason whispered. "Who cares?" Tiffany spat, breathing hard. "Get up and help me break this casing open." "No, Tiff, look," Jason said, his voice trembling with a new kind of fear. Not the fear of debt, but the fear of consequences. He read the inscription out loud. The microphone picked it up clearly. "Property of the National Historical Trust. Registered landmark site number 402. Warning. Any alteration, removal, or damage to this equipment is a federal offense under the National Heritage Preservation Act. Violators will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." The silence that followed was heavier than the iron presses. Tiffany stopped panting. She lowered the wrench. She walked over to where Jason was pointing. She stared at the brass plate. "What does that mean?" she whispered. "It means," Jason said, looking up at her with wide, terrified eyes, "that this isn't Dad's property anymore. He transferred it. It belongs to the government. Or a trust." "Tiff, you just took a wrench to a federal monument." "No," she shook her head, backing away. "No. He is bluffing. He put that there to scare us. He is just a senile old contractor. He doesn't know how to do this." "It is real, Tiff," Jason said, standing up. "Look at the date. It was registered 3 days ago, the day we went to dinner, the day he acted sick." "He played us," she whispered, the realization dawning on her face like a cold sunrise. She looked around the room. Suddenly the shadows seemed deeper. The machines didn't look like junk anymore. They looked like evidence. The scratch she had made on the linotype, the drawer she had smashed, the lock they had cut. It wasn't just vandalism. It was a felony on a scale she couldn't even calculate. "We have to go," she hissed, dropping the wrench. It clattered loudly on the concrete. "We have to leave. Now. We were never here." She turned towards the open door, grabbing Jason's sleeve. "Come on. Move." But they were too late. I sat in the driver's seat of the van and took a deep breath. This was it. The curtain call. I reached for the dashboard and flipped the switch for the auxiliary lights I had mounted on the grille. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I shifted into drive and stomped on the gas pedal. The van surged forward, jumping the curb and screeching to a halt right in front of the open warehouse door, blocking their exit. At the same moment, I hit the high beams. 4,000 lumens of LED light flooded the warehouse entrance. It was blinding. It turned the dark interior into a stage lit by a supernova. Tiffany and Jason froze. They threw their hands up to shield their eyes, looking like deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. They couldn't see me. All they could see was a wall of white light. I opened the door of the van and stepped out. I didn't need the cane. I didn't need the stooped posture. I stood tall. I walked into the light, my silhouette casting a long, dark shadow that stretched all the way to the back of the warehouse, covering them both. "Going somewhere?" I asked. My voice was calm, steady, and amplified by the acoustics of the metal building. "Dad." Jason gasped, squinting into the glare. Tiffany stammered. "Vic, thank God. We saw the door open. We thought someone broke in. We came to check on it. We were trying to protect your stuff." I shook my head slowly. Even now. Even caught red-handed with a wrench at her feet and a cut lock behind her, she was still lying. It was a reflex. "Stop it, Tiffany," I said, walking closer. My boots crunched on the gravel. I stopped at the threshold of the door, looking down at the melted metal of the lock. I saw the plasma cutter sitting on the ground. I saw the destruction inside. "I watched you," I said. "I watched every second. I watched you cut the door. I watched you smash the type cabinet. I watched you try to destroy the only thing your mother-in-law loved because you couldn't turn it into a trip to the Maldives." "Vic, please," she started to cry, but they were crocodile tears. "I can explain. We are in trouble. We are desperate." "You are not desperate." I cut her off. "You are greedy. There is a difference. Desperate people ask for help. Greedy people take what isn't theirs." I pulled the phone from my pocket. The screen was still glowing with the recording. "And you didn't just break into my warehouse," I continued, my voice hardening. "You broke into a protected historical site. You see, I knew you would come. I knew you couldn't wait. So I made sure that when you did, you wouldn't just be stealing from your father. You would be stealing from history." Jason looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, I am sorry. She made me." I looked at my son. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a deep, profound pity. "She didn't make you do anything, Jason," I said softly. "You are a grown man. You held the key. You could have walked away. You chose this." Suddenly a new sound cut through the night air. It started low, a distant wail, but it grew louder and louder with every second. Sirens. Not one, but many. Tiffany's head snapped up. She looked past me out into the street. Blue and red lights began to flash against the brick walls of the surrounding buildings, pulsing in time with the wailing sirens. "I called them 10 minutes ago," I said, checking my watch. "Big Mike called them too. They take historical preservation very seriously in this district." "No," Tiffany screamed, backing away. "No, you can't do this. We are family. You can't send us to jail. Vic, please. I am pregnant." I stared at her. It was the final lie. The desperate Hail Mary pass. "No, you are not," I said coldly. "I saw you drinking wine at dinner 3 nights ago. I saw you drinking whiskey tonight. You are not pregnant, Tiffany. You are just out of options." The first police cruiser screeched to a halt behind my van. Doors slammed. Voices shouted commands. Beam of flashlights cut through the darkness from the other side. "Police, show me your hands. Drop the tools." I stepped aside, clearing the doorway. I looked at Jason and Tiffany one last time. They were huddled together by the ruined linotype machine, illuminated by the harsh mix of my headlights and the police strobes. They looked small, They looked trapped. I gave you a warning, I whispered, though they couldn't hear me over the chaos. I gave you a chance, I gave you a choice. I turned my back on them. As the officers rushed past me, weapons drawn, I walked towards the van, feeling the cold wind on my face. It was over. The demolition was complete. The site was cleared. Now finally, I could start to rebuild. But first I had to watch the debris get hauled away. The chaos that followed was a symphony of flashing lights and shouted commands. I stood by the hood of my van, my arms crossed against the cold wind, watching the inevitable conclusion of the path my son and his wife had chosen. The police officers moved with professional efficiency. They didn't care about Tiffany's designer coat or Jason's tear-streaked face. To them, these were just suspects in a felony break-in caught standing over the evidence with industrial cutting tools. "Get on the ground," an officer shouted, pointing a flashlight directly into Tiffany's eyes. She didn't move immediately. She was still in shock, her brain unable to process that the world she thought she controlled had just shattered. She tried to use her voice, the weapon that had served her so well in boardrooms and at dinner parties. "Do you know who I am?" she shrieked, shielding her eyes. "This is a misunderstanding. That man is my father-in-law. Vic, tell them. Tell them this is a family dispute." She pointed a trembling finger at me. I didn't say a word. I just looked at the sergeant approaching me. I recognized him. Sergeant Miller. We had played poker together at the VFW hall a few times. He looked from me to the broken door, then to the plasma cutter on the ground. Vic Miller said, his voice grave. "This looks bad. We got a call about a 1021 in progress. Breaking and entering. Destruction of property." I reached into my jacket pocket. I moved slowly so no one would get nervous. I pulled out the folded legal document that Saul had prepared, the one with the ink still fresh from 3 days ago. I also held up my phone, which was still recording. "It is not a family dispute, Sergeant," I said, my voice loud enough for Tiffany to hear. "It is a federal crime. I have video evidence of them using a plasma torch to bypass a reinforced security lock, and I have evidence of them destroying the interior contents." Tiffany struggled as an officer grabbed her wrist to pull her away from the machines. "Let go of me, it is just scrap metal. It is his stuff. He gave us the keys." I walked forward then. I walked right up to the police line, stopping just a few feet from where Tiffany was being restrained. I wanted her to see me. I wanted her to hear the numbers that were about to ruin her life. "You think this is scrap metal?" I asked, gesturing to the linotype machine she had battered with the wrench. "It is rusted junk," she spat back, though her voice was wavering. "It is worth pennies." I shook my head slowly. I turned to Sergeant Miller, but I spoke to her. "That machine is a Mergenthaler Model 9 linotype built in 1920. It is one of only 3 working models left in North America. The Smithsonian has been trying to acquire it from my wife for 10 years. Last month, before she passed, we had it appraised." I paused. The silence in the warehouse was absolute. Even the police officers seemed to be listening. "The appraisal value for the collection in this room intact is $5.2 million, I said. The color drained from Tiffany's face so fast, she looked like a ghost. Her knees actually buckled, and the officer had to hold her up. $5 million, she whispered. Her lips barely moved. "Yes," I continued, twisting the knife of truth deeper. $5 million. "But that is not the worst part, Tiffany. The worst part is the piece of brass you were too busy screaming to read." I pointed to the plaque on the machine. "When you put that torch to the door, and when you took that wrench to the gear housing, you didn't just damage private property. You triggered a clause in this trust document. As of the moment you forced entry, the ownership of this building and everything in it automatically transferred to the National Historical Preservation Trust." I handed the document to Sergeant Miller. He shined his flashlight on the relevant paragraph and whistled low. "It says here that the site is a federally protected landmark," Miller said, looking up at Tiffany with a look of disbelief. "Ma'am, you just vandalized government property." That is a federal felony. We are talking about the same laws that protect the Liberty Bell. Tiffany looked at the machine. She looked at the dent she had made. She looked at the scattered lead type on the floor, but I didn't know, he stammered. I just wanted to sell it. I just wanted the copper. I stepped closer until I was right in her face. You wanted $200,000 in scrap, I said. That is what you told your shark on the phone. You were willing to melt down $5 million of history just to get a quick payout for your debts. I looked at Jason. He was sitting on the bumper of a police cruiser, his head in his hands. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the ground, sobbing quietly. And because you damaged it, I said, turning back to Tiffany, you didn't just lose the money. You destroyed the value. That gear housing you cracked, that was original cast iron. It can't be replaced. You just knocked $1 million off the value of the collections in 10 seconds of rage. Tiffany began to hyperventilate. The reality was crashing down on her. The debt was still there. The penthouse was gone. And now prison was staring her in the face. Vic, please, she begged, and this time the desperation was real. She lunged towards me, but the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. The sound was final, sharp, cold. Vic, tell them to stop. I will pay for it. We will fix it. Don't let them take me. I can't go to jail. I am not a criminal. You are a criminal, I said, my voice void of any sympathy. You are a thief who steals from the dead. You tried to steal my dignity. You tried to steal my wife's legacy. And you tried to steal your husband's soul. Sergeant Miller nodded to his officers. Take them in. As they began to drag her towards the cruiser, she fought. She kicked and screamed, cursing me, cursing Jason, cursing the world. But I didn't flinch. I watched her struggle, remembering how she had looked at Beatrice's funeral, checking her watch, bored by our grief. Wait, I said loudly. The officers paused. Tiffany looked back, a flicker of hope in her eyes. She thought I was going to save her. She thought I was the weak old man who would cave at the last second. I walked up to her. I looked her dead in the eye. You were looking for gold, Tiffany, I said softly. You kept asking where the treasure was. I pointed at the dirty floor of the warehouse, at the majestic dark machines rising into the shadows. You were standing on a gold mine. You were standing right in the middle of it. All you had to do was show a little respect. All you had to do was wait. But you were so greedy you couldn't see the diamonds because they were covered in a little bit of dust. And now you leave with nothing. I nodded to the officers. Get her out of my sight. They shoved her into the back of the car. She slumped against the window, defeating weeping, watching her life disappear in the rearview mirror. I walked over to Jason. He hadn't moved. An officer was waiting to cuff him, but he was giving us a moment. Jason looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. Dad, he whispered. I didn't know about the $5 million. I swear. I looked down at my son. That is the problem, Jason, I said sadly. You think the value of something is the number on the price tag. You never understood that the real value was the love your mother put into this place. You could have asked. You could have trusted me. But you chose the easy way. You chose the lie. I was scared, Dad. The debt is yours, I said. And now the consequences are yours too. I can't fix this for you, son. I won't fix this for you. I turned to Sergeant Miller. Book them, Sergeant. I will come down to the station tomorrow to give my formal statement and hand over the full video files. Vic, are you sure? Miller asked quietly. He is your boy. I looked at Jason one last time as the officer pulled his hands behind his back and the metal cuffs locked into place. I know, I said, my voice cracking for the first time that night. That is why it has to be this way. If I bail him out now, he never becomes a man. He just stays a victim. I watched as they put my son into the second cruiser. The convoy began to move, lights, flashing sirens, wailing, leaving the industrial district and heading back toward the city that breaks the weak and builds the strong. I stood alone in the open doorway of the warehouse. The cold wind blew inside, swirling the dust. I walked over to the linotype machine. I ran my hand over the dent Tiffany had made. It was deep. It was ugly. But it could be fixed. Iron can be welded. Parts can be machined. But trust. Trust is like glass. Once it is shattered, you can never put it back together the same way. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the real key, the one that opened the inner sanctum where I kept my own personal tools. I wasn't done yet. The police would lock down the scene, but tonight I had one more thing to do. I had to secure the building. I had to make sure that even if they made bail, even if they came back, there would be nothing left for them to take. I looked at the empty spot where the police cars had been. I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. It wasn't happiness. It was the satisfaction of a job finished. The demolition was messy. It was loud. It was painful. But the rot was gone. The parasites were removed. The foundation, though scarred, was still standing. And tomorrow the renovation would begin. Not for them, but for me and for Beatrice. The fluorescent lights of the precinct interrogation room hummed with a low, irritating buzz that drilled into my skull. I sat on a metal chair that was bolted to the floor, waiting. On the other side of the scratched table sat my son. Jason looked 10 years older than he had yesterday. His expensive hoodie was confiscated, replaced by a gray county jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hand, usually so manicured, were shaking violently as he clasped them together. "Dad," he croaked, his voice cracking. "You have to help her," Tiffany called from the women's holding. "She is terrified." She said the federal charges carry a minimum of 5 years. "You know people, Dad. You know the judge. You can make a call. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I gave her permission." I looked at him, feeling a deep, hollow ache in my chest. Even now, sitting in a cage, he was still trying to protect the woman who had put him there. He was still the moth flying into the bug zapper, convinced that the blue light was warmth. "I can't do that, Jason," I said, my voice steady but quiet. "And even if I could, I wouldn't. She didn't make a mistake. She made a choice. She chose to destroy a federal landmark because she was too lazy to work for a living. But she is my wife," Jason pleaded, tears spilling onto the metal table. "She is family." "She is an accomplice," I corrected him. "And right now you are one too. The only reason you aren't facing the same charges is because I told the district attorney that you tried to stop her. I told them you were coerced. That is the only lifeline I am throwing you, son." Jason slumped back in his chair, defeated. "So that is it. You are just going to let us rot. After everything Mom wanted, she wanted us to be together." I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the linoleum. "Your mother wanted you to be a man, Jason. She wanted you to stand on your own 2 feet. She didn't want you to be a puppet for a woman who loves your credit limit more than she loves you." I reached into my shirt pocket. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I didn't pull out a lawyer's card. I pulled out a simple white business card. It was stained with a little bit of coffee, and the edges were bent. I slid it across the table to him. "What is this?" Jason asked, staring at it. "It is a number for a construction foreman I know in Omaha, Nebraska," I said. "His name is Frank. I called him this morning. He is looking for laborers. It is pouring concrete, Jason. It is hard work. It is dirty work. It pays $18 an hour, and you start at 5 in the morning." Jason looked up at me, his jaw dropping. "You want me to mix cement? In Nebraska, I want you to learn what money actually weighs," I said, leaning in close. "I want you to feel the ache in your back that earned the roof over your head. I want you to understand that $1 isn't just a number on a screen. It is a drop of sweat. I tapped the card with my index finger. I am not giving you any more money. The penthouse is gone. The cars are gone. The debts are yours to settle. But if you take this job, if you show up every day for 6 months, if you prove to me that you can build something instead of just consuming it, then we can talk. Then maybe we can be father and son again. Jason stared at the card. It was a lifeline, but it looked like a sentence. And Tiffany, he whispered. Leave her, I said, turning towards the heavy steel door. If she loves you, she will wait for you to finish your shift in Omaha. But we both know she won't. She is looking for a new host, Jason. Do not be the carcass she leaves behind. I knocked on the door for the guard. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, I might have caved. I might have hugged him, and that would have been the worst thing I could do. He needed the cold. He needed the hard ground. It was the only way he would ever learn to stand up. I walked out of the station and into the morning sun. The air was crisp. I got into my truck and drove. I didn't go home to the empty house. I went back to the warehouse. The police tape was still fluttering across the broken door, but the crime scene unit had cleared out. I ducked under the yellow tape and unlocked the inner gate with my master key. Inside, the air was still heavy with the smell of ozone from the plasma cutter, but underneath that, there was the smell of ink and grease. I walked over to the linotype machine. The dent in the casing was ugly, a scar of the violence that had happened here, but the machine was still standing. I picked up a rag and wiped away the dust that Tiffany had stirred up. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I walked to the main breaker box and threw the heavy lever. The overhead lights flickered on, buzzing to life. I walked over to the Heidelberg press, the one Beatrice loved the most. I checked the oil levels. I checked the rollers. Then I pressed the green start button. For a second, there was only a hum. Then, with a rhythmic thump, 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 the great flywheel began to turn. The suction cups hissed as they grabbed a blank sheet of paper. The gripper arm swung around. The rollers kissed the type. Ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. The sound filled the empty warehouse. It wasn't noise. It was music. It sounded like a heartbeat. Strong, steady, unbreakable. I pulled up a stool and sat there watching the machine run. I was alone. My wife was gone. My son was in a cell. My daughter-in-law was facing federal prison. The silence in my life should have been deafening. But as I sat there listening to the press run, I didn't feel lonely. I felt a strange, quiet sense of pride. I had protected this. I had saved the history. I had stopped the rot from spreading. I picked up the first sheet of paper that came out of the press. It was blank, but to me it looked like a fresh start. I was 70 years old. I was tired. But I was free. I wasn't being used anymore. I wasn't being lied to. I closed my eyes and let the rhythm of the machine wash over me. Beatrice was right. You have to build a strong foundation, and sometimes to do that, you have to tear down the house that is sitting on quicksand. It hurts. God, it hurts. But when the dust settles, you are left with something real. And that is enough. There is a lesson here that took me 70 years and a broken heart to learn. We spend our lives trying to build wealth to protect our families, but we often forget to protect our families from the wealth itself. Money without values is just gasoline waiting for a match. I thought giving my son everything was love, but I was wrong. True love is having the courage to let them fall, to let them fail, and to let them face the consequences of their own actions. You cannot buy respect, and you certainly cannot buy loyalty. If you have someone in your life who only loves you for what you can give them, cut them loose. It will be the hardest thing you ever do, but it will be the only thing that saves you. If this story resonated with you, or if you have ever had to make a tough choice to protect your peace, please hit that subscribe button. It helps this channel more than you know. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to cut off a family member to save yourself? Let's talk about it. I will be reading your stories. Until next time, keep your foundation strong.